Hello, hello, hello. Let me test out this microphone here in a moment. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get a little background music going here. Hope everyone is doing well. We're going to kick things off in just a moment. Turn that down. I know that's too loud. Cool. So today, looking to do something we done for the first time last week. And usually this type of content I just do as a talking to the camera. And I'm gonna talk to the camera again today, but I figured why not do it live, number one, and add a little visual with the whiteboard, just so you can have something to look at other than my ugly mug the entire time. But more importantly, I hope you get something out of it and pick up on some tips that can help you with your developing your programming journey. Make a friend along the way. And if you like this type of content, look, feel free to subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. I promise I'm a nice guy. I'm only here to help. And I am here to help continue to inspire you. Give me just a moment. I think the mic's good. Just want to make sure. I got a credit card payment I got a credit card payment I need to make pretty soon too. Make sure I do that. Don't need no negative impacts on me credits. We're gonna jump in and get started. I got a few topics I want to talk about today. I'm gonna try to get, I think I got 4. I'm gonna try to get through all of them today, but if not, I will certainly conclude them at a later time. But my intention is to get through all of them today, but we'll just kind of see how things go. But I thank everybody that took time out to leave a like, a share, a post, a comment, the chat or the video itself. It genuinely means a lot, and I hope you get something from it the same way I get something from you providing support. It means a lot, for real, for real. So in just a second here, and got a few topics we're gonna talk about, and I'll go over them. But the first one is why your code never looks like or functions like the code does on tutorials that you see. Give me 1 second. Let's catch up. If you notice, I've been doing quite a bit of learning here recently myself. I've decided to go ahead and learn cybersecurity, with all of the attacks that you read about and vulnerabilities that are out there with websites and networks and things of that sort. I thought it'd be pretty cool to have a good understanding of it myself so that it would make me a better developer, to make sure that I am appropriately caring for my clients' security and their potential customers. And I just thought that it'd be good for me to kind of have a good understanding of it. It doesn't take very long to learn. And at the end of the day, I'm a lifelong learner, just as a lot of you are out learning as well. So we'll be in this together. I post the content, or I do my studying live. Obviously, I do some supplement with that outside of what I can show on, not what I can show, what I have time to show on YouTube. If it was something that you were interested in, I'll be happy to show me practicing on my phone and finding little ways to steal time, because ultimately that's really what it's about. If you're a busy adult like myself, you may not have time that you can always sit down and dedicate to doing or studying. You have to find ways to get studying in, and that is on top of everything with the kids, everything with the family, everything with my wife or whatever, maybe my mother, father-in-law, stepfather, mother-in-law, stepmother-in-law, whatever, everyone else in the family. That's you have to find little ways to steal time. So sometimes I may just be on my phone while I'm walking and pull up a documentation to read up on a specific topic that I might not be that familiar with. So with that said, Enough of a life update on me. Let's go ahead and jump in and get started. So, as you can see, the first thing I want to talk about is why your code will never look like the code that you see on a tutorial. So, I know this can. Let me start by just saying something that might feel a little uncomfortable, and I hope I don't offend anyone by saying this, but um, as we kind of talk through this, it'll make a lot more sense. You know, when you're learning the code, and you're watching a tutorial, that is a very passive way to go about learning. So you're going to obviously pick up on some concepts and some things that you might not have been familiar with from the instructor, but just remember that it is very, very passive. And if you take the time and actually write the exact same lines of code that the instructor has on screen, you should walk away with a finished product and have something that works. But and there are going to be some terminology and maybe some tips along the way that you learn. But just keep in mind that that's not a practical way that you want to go about learning, especially learning programming. That is something that you always want to become and to be more hands-on with than just watching someone else do something, you following what they do, and you feeling as if you have learned something or picked up the exact same thing that they instructed. Again, you're going to learn some tips along the way, but it's not going to be the same efficient or as impactful as it would have been if this was something that you did without so much guidance. So yeah, let me see something. That's a good question. I think it's over here, man. I can. How does that look, brother? Thank you for the feedback. Let me know if it's any better. I hope it is. That does look better. I like that a lot better myself. Let me close that up too. I ain't even think about making it a dark background, but I hope it is better. If not, just let me know. So, you know, your code should never really look like a tutorial, but if you're following it line for line, letter for letter, then obviously it will. But as you're starting to challenge yourself to learn and to step away from a tutorial and to maybe even do what the instructor has suggested, which is absolutely, brother, which is not, which is to add on to the foundation that they've provided. You know, obviously, if you're adding something that they didn't include, yes, it's not going to look like theirs. But I don't want you to get upset because that end product might not look exactly how you intended or the way that they actually coded it in the tutorial. You know, don't get so caught up in the fact that, hey, this doesn't look like what they did. I must be doing something wrong. I must be doing something different. I'm not good enough. You know, don't allow those thoughts to enter into your mind because honestly, when your code stop looking like what you see in a tutorial, that's the moment in the space you want to be in. And that's really when the real true learning starts to take place. Awesome, my friend. Thank you for that feedback. Thank you for the feedback. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. So let's talk about number one, what tutorials are actually for. You know, honestly, a tutorial is really just a blueprint of giving you a good starting foundation to build upon something larger. You know, a lot of times you see some content creators, especially on YouTube, and maybe if you purchase a Udemy course, they'll start with a simple CRUD project. And at the end, or they may give you an e-commerce website, but somewhere at the end or throughout that tutorial, they're going to say, hey, this is just here to get you started. Go ahead and add on to this project or add on to what you've already built. And here's the place that you want to actually start to look because really that tutorial is just to kind of give you a good starting foundation. They're going to talk about, if it's a good one, they're going to talk about concepts. They're going to talk more about patterns than syntax or the overall workflow that you want to incorporate in order to build a CRUD project. Because if you think about it, that simple CRUD project, building a notes app, a blog app, something of that sort, is really the foundation of every website that you go to for the most part. Every website that is interactive, that requires and takes in user input, generally has some form of CRUD, whether it's a social media website, you're creating a social post, you're updating that social post, you're deleting it, and you're getting all of the posts that you created and that other creators have created. The same thing with the blog website. You enter in a blog, you post that blog on the page. The create portion is going to be you adding the blog, updating, maybe you're making some changes to the title or some of the content throughout, deleting a post saying, hey, you know what, this post didn't fit, or I didn't write this the way I intended. Instead of updating it, I'm going to go ahead and delete it, and getting all posts, which would be displaying them within some sort of a dashboard or maybe to the front end so that the end user can see it. And this is the same thing with a e-commerce website. A little more complex, but if you think about it, it's the exact same thing. You have a contact or a CMS, excuse me, where you can add in products, set prices, set quantity, different things of that sort. The front end user is going to get or see all of the products that you've created. On the back end, you have the ability to update and delete. And obviously, this has a little bit more complexity if it's e-commerce. So you're going to have a add to cart feature, or you're going to have something else that goes along with it so that you can see a total and then integrate a payment gateway. But if you think about it, every website that's out there is going to start with that foundation of CRUD. And that's why CRUD is so important. And that's why most content creators that create tutorials and courses and things of that sort of say, hey, use this as a foundation to get you started. So number one, it never should look the exact same, because it really should just be a blueprint. Just keep in mind as well too, that if you wanted to branch out from the tutorial, you may find that, hey, I did this a little differently. I used this as a foundation, but their file structure may be a little different than mine. They may not have the same roadblocks that you ran into. Depending upon the version of the framework that you're using, you may run into a different obstacle than what that creator did when they created that tutorial. You may not necessarily have access to all of the legacy packages or legacy code. You may have to use something different in order to get things work. That's where you just want to use it as the foundation. I'm gonna go back to CRUD because I know that a lot of us are inspiring full stack developers. So you always want to start with the model view controller, MVC. If you're a computer science student, I know you've heard of that. But every CRUD project is going to have a model, which is going to be what organizes the data. The view is part of what you're seeing, and that controller is giving you the ability to have your routes and be able to update and make changes and different things of that sort. Appreciate it, my brother. I agree, man. I don't think it's talked about enough, the mental aspect of learning code and how easy it is to get discouraged. And I had the advantage of learning at a little later in life than some of you, but we still went through the same struggles, and we still have imposter syndrome, and we lose motivation, and we fall off, and we feel we're not good enough. So I really feel that the mindset should be talked about more than what it is, because you have to go into coding with the right mindset. You have to go in with the right perspective, because if you continue to compare yourself to others, your quote unquote competition, in theory it is, because we all are going for certain jobs. Then if you compare yourself, then you'll get discouraged and not keep going. And that's not the perspective that you want to have. So, look, as you're building out your project and you're using tutorials to kind of give you that guide and that blueprint, your project already kind of has decisions, and you have to be prepared to make trade-offs. Thank you. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate that. You want to your project kind of already has the decisions laid out for you with a tutorial, when if you didn't follow a tutorial, you're going to have to make those decisions yourself. And that decision making can be something that's overthought, especially if you are just getting started or you're not that comfortable with the direction that you want to go in. Making decisions is very taxing. Heck, I can even think about right now, if someone were to say, hey, what are you going to have for dinner? Now I have to make a decision on what it is that I want. Do I want to have something that's in the house? Do I want to pick something up? Do I want to eat out? Do I not want to eat? This is another decision that has to be made. A coding project is no different. And if you're following a tutorial, those tutorials are going to already have those decisions made for you. So you don't have to worry about making them, which is good in one respect, but you're also losing that skill set of making decisions, which is truly important, because that's what building programs is going to be all about. And at a small scale, you're going to say, hey, what framework, what database, what ORM? As the complexity scales, hey, do I put this in a container? Where do I deploy this project? What firewalls am I going to have in place in order to secure this application? Like, these are decisions that you have to make as your project grows in complexity. And tutorial kind of strips you of that development of a skill set. They serve the purpose, don't get me wrong, but just keep in mind that you're not gaining that skill that you do need in order to continue to progress as a developer. So now I want to talk a little bit about why copying someone else's structure is really kind of holding you back. A lot of the times when we first starting out the code, we think that, hey, I'm just going to copy the same structure that someone else is using. They're an experienced developer. They seem like they know what they're talking about, and I'm just going to copy it. You'll find yourself using the same name of files, using the same organization structure, using the same syntax or how they write their code, so that it's not unique to you, but it is something that someone else just has in place. So you're going to follow it. And where a lot of people find themselves getting stuck is that, hey, when you step away from that tutorial, or when it's time for you to build something on your own, you're not as comfortable because you don't have the same symmetry with your project as that person did that you were previously following. If you have the same file structure, the same folder structure as someone else, and it is not a part of the actual framework itself, then you're really not learning. You're stopping yourself from gaining valuable experience that you should be picking up on by determining, hey, this is the way I like to structure my folders. This is the way that I like to have my files lay out. I like to have all of my actions in this file in a separate directory, or I like to have them included within the same directory, just written in a way that it ignores it from a routing perspective if you're using Next.js, but it is still close nearby, so I know where exactly my actions are as it relates to the component that's using that action. Whatever it may be, it's going to change based upon the project and what it is that you ultimately want to do. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you don't take the time out to develop your own structure and understand what it is that you want, then you are prohibiting yourself from growing the way that you actually should. Because once you don't have this tutorial and it is time for you to build your own project, you don't know exactly why you want to put certain files in certain places, because sometimes you need to venture out and have things done a certain way. But if you don't have that experience already, because you're following tutorials and doing what someone else is doing, or doing what someone else is suggesting, when the training wheels come off, you're going to find yourself stuck, and you really didn't learn what you wanted to learn and get everything from that project. You are limiting yourself with very minimum understanding. Yeah, you may know the syntax, you may know where you may know what it takes in order to create or update or delete, but where you're going to put the action that's going to make the call to the server and to the database. These are things that you have to know. Did you set your project up so that it can scale, so that once you add a feature to the project, you know exactly where you're putting your features, you know exactly where you need to go in and make changes, and you know how to make those updates. If you had a responsive menu, or you created a link on a page that you realized didn't highlight, if you didn't put it in the right place, you're going to have a hard time making that update. Case in point, sometimes when we first starting out, and it is perfectly fine to do this, I am not talking about anyone. Heck, I got plenty of projects on my channel that I go back and look upon and I cringe, But let's just say I have a nav bar as something simple. We're doing a web development site, right? And I want to indicate that I'm on a particular page by having a active link on this website. If I hard code all of my links within one file, or it's going to make it a little more challenging in order to update that file. What if I made this file render on the server versus the client? Now I'm going to have to separate it out because I have to use something that's going to give some client side interactivity. What if I want to add a route to my project? If I don't know where I put it, or I didn't put it in the appropriate place that is prepared for me to scale as this project grows, now I'm going to have to go back and rewrite this entire file so that it scales appropriately. It gives the activity that I want, and most importantly, it works. But these are little decisions that you have to make to say, hey, you know what? This blog app is going to grow more than just all of my blogs. Eventually, I want to have a contact me link. I want to have an about me link. Where am I going to place these additional items within the project so I can easily add to the project without having to rewrite everything? And if I missed a step along the way because something wasn't as pertinent to the project when I initially started out, where are my files? Where did I place them so I can easily go back and make those updates? So these little small decisions are things that you do have to kind of think about. And if you're just following a tutorial, and if that tutorial didn't give you everything that you were looking for, you may find yourself stuck or in a tough place when it comes time to making decisions. And that's not a good place to be in. You may have learned something from this tutorial. I'm not going to say you didn't, but you didn't get the true understanding that you really needed, because now you have to think about, how do I grow this? What's next? What do I want to do outside of this that this tutorial didn't teach me? And if you don't understand how to set your project up to do that, you can find yourself in a tough space, spinning your wheels. And ultimately, if you're early in your journey and you don't have the appropriate confidence, you'll find yourself giving up, walking away, thinking you're not good enough. And I really, really don't want you to do that, because you are. You just didn't have the appropriate instructions on how to do the things that you wanted to do. So why does different not mean wrong? And I don't want you to think that there's anything wrong with being different. You want to be unique. You want to be different than someone else. That's what's going to separate you from someone else. So here's the most important reframe that I want you to think about, because it's okay to have a different project than someone else. It doesn't have to look exactly like theirs. Just keep in mind that different means that you made a decision. You should be giving yourself a pat on the back for this, because you want to have a unique and a different approach than someone else. That means that you're learning. That means that you're growing. That means that you're taking the time to do the things that you need to do to be a better developer. Again, that tutorial should just be for 1 hour. It really should cover high level concepts. If it is really in depth and in detail, it should kind of introduce you to adding new features, how you want to go about it, planning before you actually code. These are little things that aren't talked about enough when you are building out a project. A lot of times you just want to jump straight into code, build something, have a finished product, have something that I can show to someone else. And that's great. That end game and that end vision in mind is ultimately what you want. But you got to remember, there are little steps along the way before you can get there that you got to make sure you don't skip over. So when your project does look different than someone else's, look, that's a good thing. Don't get upset about that. Don't think that you did anything wrong. You know, your logic might live in a different place than be the way that project that you followed, or the starter project that you had set up actually did, because you intend to take this blog application and add comments to it. So instead of having all of the blogs projected in one file, maybe you want to do it in a central location, because you want to show all blogs by user, all blogs in general, and it made more sense for you to have it in a different file than to include it where the instructor may initially had it set up at. You know, these are good things. These are the right train of thoughts that you want to have as you're building out a project, because again, it should be different. That's absolutely normal. That's the space you want to be in. It may feel a little uncomfortable in the beginning because your code doesn't match, but I promise you, you're on the right track, because your thinking is the way it should be. It should not look like someone else's. It should be different. because your end goal should be significantly different than the person's tutorial that you're actually watching. So let's just say you wanted to build a calendar clone, right? I know Google has a calendar that you can leverage, and I'm just kind of speaking of some stuff that I've been asked about that might be beneficial, or we may find ourselves wanting to build something similar. Hey, I have a person that I built a beat sharing website that is very similar to, I think it's called BeatStars, where you can upload music, you know, and I couldn't find a tutorial on that, not necessarily that I wanted one, but there isn't anything out there that's very similar to that, right? The other thing that he wanted integrated into this is because he's an artist, or he's a sound engineer, excuse me. He wanted the ability for certain people to be able to book him, and they needed to be able to see his calendar in addition to have the ability to book him. And the way you will book him is by making a payment for the hours and the time frame that he designated, right? So if I just followed a traditional YouTube tutorial that showed you how to build a calendar, how to book someone, that would have thrown me off because he has a different need than someone else. And if I follow someone else's tutorial and now I'm trying to integrate a payment gateway, whether it be Stripe, Cash App, or any of the other payment gateways out there, then I'm going to find myself stuck, or I'm going to start to feel as if I'm not good enough, or I'm doing something wrong, because my code, my file structure, my folder structure is different than a tutorial's. But you got to keep in mind, I have a different end game. I just use this tutorial to kind of show me, hey, how do I get this stupid little calendar built that I'm not familiar with? I don't want to use so many packages. I'd rather just build one from scratch. So I found an awesome tutorial to kind of help with that. But keep in mind, what this gentleman or young lady built won't look exactly like mine, because I have to add different features into my project, wherein they only just showed me how to build just a calendar. I hope that makes sense, because you shouldn't allow yourself to get upset because your project and what you have built is different than someone else's. Remember, you're going after something different. You're only using this tutorial to kind of get you started, but ultimately it's going to be up to you to kind of finish this out, to make it unique, and just be okay with being different, because that's a good sign. You're not failing, you're not struggling, you're thinking, you're making decisions, and you're really on the right path to becoming the developer that you inspired to be. And a lot of times when things don't go as planned, this is where people give up. And I hate it, because you really are on the edge of your breakthrough. But a lot of times we don't find ourselves with the right strength or the right courage to keep going. We just give up on it because it didn't look how someone else's look, or it come out the way that we envision it. When that tutorial ends and you're left with your own code, no one's there to give you guidance, no clear next step, no perfect example to compare yourself to. A lot of times you find yourself just assuming that you're not ready. I need to keep looking. Let me just see if there's a Udemy course. Let me see if there's another YouTube video. Let me look on TikTok. Or even worse, I should just restart the entire project because this didn't come out the way that I intended for it to. But what you actually need is to sit down and sit in that uncertainty and embrace it, because ultimately this is the space you need to be in. You need to be challenged. You need to be in a space where you need to make decisions and understand the trade-offs. You don't restart the project. Don't give up. Don't waste your time trying to find what someone else has already built that comes close to what you're looking to build. No, embrace the fact that, hey, I'm at a sticking point. I'm at a crossroad. I have to make a decision with this project. Let me kind of think through what exactly I want to do, how this should look, and what I need to do to get this across the finish line. Because the more uncertain you are, that's really where the real learning actually begins. It's the first step. I'm not saying that you've learned because you're still uncertain, but it's the first step in genuine learning. If you were to just follow what someone else done, they have helped you complete a task. But when you have to make decisions, when you have to think, when you have to get your hands dirty, that's when the true learning begins. This is just like if you were to try to fix a car, right? You can sit back and read theories and watch YouTube videos all day, but until you actually get under the hood, take the, unscrew the bolts, take the spark plugs out, change the brake pads, whatever it is that needs to get done, until you've actually done it, you can't say that you really learned it. You've just seen it done. You're aware of the concepts and the flow and what should take place, but you haven't actually done the task yourself. So you can't say that you've done it. So be comfortable with being uncomfortable and a level of uncertainty, because that's where the real learning begins. And as you think about it, that real goal of the tutorial isn't so much to create the perfect project that you're looking for. The goal is to walk away with the goal is to walk away with the question in your mind of what's next. What part do I understand? What part am I a little fuzzy or a little uncertain of? What did I need to go back and do a little bit more research on, because the instructor talked about a topic that I wasn't 100% familiar with. So let me just sit down and get a better understanding of this. These are the things that you really want to walk away with the tutorial from. And if that tutorial has you walking away feeling a little uncertain and asking, what do I do next? Okay, I finished it. Now what? That instructor done a very good job of giving you the appropriate amount of wisdom to get you started. Now it's up to you to complete the task at hand and to figure out what you want to do next from here. Because if that tutorial gave you confidence, you were able to get through it, you feel good, you have some positive momentum, use that as a catapult to begin what's next for you. And don't use it as a crutch. Don't continue to search for tutorials after tutorials. Use that as the opportunity to jumpstart you to the next thing at hand. And I promise you, you'll be a better developer for it. The more you challenge yourself, the more you live in that uncertainty, and the more you embrace that, hey, I'm okay with not having a good understanding of something. I'm just going to break this down into small steps, plan everything out, and incrementally add additional features until I get the project that I want. You're not racing against someone. And yeah, in theory, you are competing, but at the end of the day, you're not competing, because once you got it, your next step at that point is to be unique, stand out from the crowd, and really get in front of someone, whether it be an employer, a potential client for a freelancer role, or whatever it may be, and confidently articulate what you're capable of doing, and then back that up with some of the work that you've done. And if you can sit down and explain the trade-offs that you made for your project, even if they aren't the right trade-offs or you didn't make the best decision, but the fact that you have an understanding of what you've done and you can explain it to someone, that's really what someone wants to hear, because you have potential to continue to grow. You're not someone that's going to rely on someone else to get you to where you want to go. You have the drive, the determination, and the capability to make decisions to get to where you ultimately want to be. And that's what generally attracts people to people. Yeah, your skill is great. Can I work well with you? And do you have the drive to do what it is that we need you to do and deliver a great and productive product? So if your code doesn't look like a tutorial, I want you to stop seeing that as a problem. And that difference is not an issue. That's something that you should embrace, because what it means is that you're making decisions. And let me know in the comments and in the chat the last time or the moment that you realized that you had to make decisions with your project. What were those decisions and how did it turn out? I'd love to hear all about it. Let's see. Jump back in here. Mm-mm-mm. Let's see. baby? Where are you, baby? Ah. All right. So the next topic at hand, which correlates with our previous topic, is how do we adopt our code to be our own for a project? So basically, if you were to watch a tutorial, how do you make that tutorial code project your very own? And if you were to watch all of these videos, which I think there's value and I would encourage you to do so, we've already kind of talked about being guilty about copying code and should we do that. We've talked about why you want to copy code and that it's okay and the perspective and the way that you want to go about it. We've even talked about why your code will never look like what someone created in a tutorial, why it should and it will be unique to you and it's not going to look like what someone else done. Now I want to talk about the skill that kind of brings all of this together, and that's the ability to adapt the code that you see in a tutorial or documentation. How do you adapt it and make it into your own and adapt it into your own project? This is where people tend to get tensed and freezed up and kind of lose that confidence because they understand the tutorial, they understand the documentation, but when it's time to put it into their own project or to make it their own or to customize it so that it is their own, this is where that uncertainty and that fear kind of comes in. And then usually along with that fear, you start to kind of have the thoughts that I must be missing something or I need another tutorial or let me see what else is out there. These are the certain things that tend to come to mind when we hit this space and we have this level of uncertainty. But I just want to share with you that you're technically not missing anything. You just haven't understood or been shown how to adapt a different code structure, a different code technique into your own. So let's start by talking about why this adaptation process feels hard to begin with. You see, so the reason why this feels hard to begin with is because if you're following a tutorial, it's going to remove the context that goes behind the code and why it's being added. Everything has already been decided if you think about it. Where the code is going to live, the overall structure, what the data looks like, what database to use, what ORM to go with, how things are named, and what talks to what. All of those things are already kind of laid out for you when you're following a tutorial or if you're following a code snippet. Usually those decisions are already made. That project already has the appropriate level of context. So when it's time to drop that tutorial and jump straight into the code, your brain is a little confused because not necessarily because you're bad at coding, but because the context of what you envision and how you think things should go has already been taken away from you. That decision has already been made. You see, usually when you start a project, you're going to start with file structure. You're going to determine where things go and have your own layout. But a tutorial is going to already give that context. So now you have to figure out how do I add my code to someone else's tutorial, if you will. And this is why doing code reviews are good. But in the beginning stages, this can be a challenging thing to work with because you just haven't been exposed enough. You don't have the appropriate experience and it could be extremely uncomfortable. And again, from a mental perspective, if it's uncomfortable, you don't have the confidence and the momentum to work through it, then you can find yourself coding less, not challenging yourself enough, and eventually find yourself just walking away from coding altogether. And that's what we don't want to do. So when you think about it, when you step away from a tutorial and you jump straight in, that's challenging you at a different space than what it would be if you're leveraging what someone else already has in place. So this is why adapting can be a little harder than starting from the beginning, because you're having to pick up on what someone else is doing versus how you would initially do it if you were to build this out on your own. So the best suggestion I can give for you with this is to stop copying the files and the text and the syntax of that tutorial and start copying the ideas, the overall flow, the layout, the thought process behind things. This is a big shift that you'll have to eventually make as you are progressing in your developer journey. You want to stop copying the structure and the layout and the overall files and the path and the flows that someone else have. And you want to start copying with a strict intention. Instead of asking, where do I put this file or where should it go? Start asking, what is this code responsible for? I'm only interested in this one thing from this tutorial. How do I integrate this into my flow so that it feels like me? And then the next thing you would want to do is, how do I write this so that it fits how I write my syntax, my style of writing code? I'm not just copying what someone else done. That's extremely modular. But when you look at your overall code structure, you have quite a bit more lines of code that may not be as efficient, but most importantly, it's your own. Those subtle differences can really make a big difference, because if you think about it, if you don't have a very good understanding of the code that you actually made, you're going to find yourself making assumptions about it. And as you're making assumptions and you aren't familiar with it and you can't understand the whys behind it working, you're really finding putting yourself in a bad predicament, because if something goes wrong, and if for some reason it has to do with that code that you just copied, and you don't understand it, you didn't make it your own, you don't have a deep understanding of how it works, you're going to find yourself in a bad spot when it's time to make updates, time to make changes, and you won't be able to do it. You're going to ultimately be stuck. And then now you're not able to deliver to your client, to your end user, because you took a shortcut of just copying someone else's file or their syntax versus trying to implement a specific thing in a way that you understand it and in a way that makes sense to you. These are things that can lead to your lack of confidence, deflate your momentum, and really set you back as a developer. So you got to be careful with copying someone else's code and syntax verbatim. You want to implement the flow and have a good understanding of what it is that they're doing, and not necessarily copy character for character, line for line, function for function code that someone else written. So here's an adaption process that I've used personally that I think will be beneficial for you as well. So number one, identify the end goal. What problem is this code solving? So for example, with a calendar clone, if you will, building out a calendar that allows an end user to book on someone's website or on someone else's calendar, I may leverage the documentation or a tutorial for the calendar to see where they got it from. Is there a package that can make this easier? Did they just write it from scratch? And as they're working through it and they're talking about, hey, I used the for loop to create the grid layout based upon the overall grid layout. I use the date object to help me with creating today's date. I'll start to add those things in on my own and I'll type them out myself. Sure, I could copy it from the docs or I can do whatever with, copy what someone else has already written, but it's more impactful if I'm writing it myself. I'm following their flow, but I'm writing it out myself because now I understand how it works. And if I need to make changes, if I need to customize it based on the client needs, then I'm good because I have the skill set to do it. I'm not relying on someone else. I don't feel stuck. It's not going to take me weeks on end to do the simplest thing. I just need to go in and make a couple quick changes, read the notes and the comments that I put in the file, make those updates, ship it, have the end user tested or the client tested. And as long as they're good with it, boom, we're good to go. But if I just copied it directly from what someone else done, I'm going to struggle in that process as they start to ask me to customize things. The second thing is identifying the inputs. I talked about this a few videos ago. Having your inputs, your outputs, and your transformation. That's really the key flow to every project that's being built. What data does this code expect? Where does this data come from? After I've identified those things, then hey, you know what? They're using MongoDB for a database. I'd rather use something that's real time. They're using a built-in server with built-in backend APIs with Next.js. I'm going to write a standalone Express server because I want to add a mobile app in addition to having a web application, and I just want to keep them separate. So I'm going to have a separate server itself. These are some of the trade-offs that you may want to make and that you want to consider as you're developing your project, because ultimately, again, this needs to be your own. And again, you want to follow the flow, not the syntax. The third thing is identifying your outputs. What changes after this code runs? What's the database? What's the UI? What's the network request? They may be using one specific pattern to make the request and return that data to the user. It may be more beneficial and more optimal to use a different pattern. Maybe I want to use Stream to help pre-update the UI. Maybe I want to have a loading animation. Maybe they did something different. Again, you want to follow the actual flow, not necessarily the same thing that they done, because what they're delivering as an experience might not be the experience that you want to deliver, or more importantly, your client wants you to deliver. The fourth thing I always consider is I map out those ideas in my own project. Anytime before I write a single line of code, I always like to start with a quote unquote documentation or a README file that just kind of talks about the logic, the trade-offs, the whys, what it is that I went with, and some high level implementation of how to implement the code that I added. I'm not going to follow that tutorial line by line and step by step and use the exact same stack that they use. I have a stack that I prefer to use myself that works well for myself and my clients. And depending upon what they want, the first thing I'm going to take a look at is what's the cost behind this. Hey, my friend that wants the BeatStars clone of his own. Very first thing we need to talk about is the cost associated with this. How large of files do we need to upload? What makes the most sense from a storage bucket perspective? I do a lot of coding with Prisma and Postgres and Vercel, but hey, maybe we need to switch over to Cloudflare for what you're looking to do because they have a more generous storage bucket. These are things that you want to kind of prepare for based upon the client's needs. If they have a lot of traffic, we need to implement load balancers. We need to implement rate limiters, these things that cost. That's the first place I always start with the client, is to make sure they have a very good understanding of the cost. And do they want me to assume that cost, or is that something that they're going to pay for directly? And if they're going to pay me for it, then it needs to be built into my overall cost to deliver this product. If they're going to pay for it directly, which is even better for me, I know I'm going to charge them less. You're just going to be the one responsible to make sure that you have a card on file and that everything is paid for in a timely manner with the vendor that you're using to store your files. And if you don't pay it, it's going to impact your website. So just kind of know that. Wherein if it's me that's responsible for it, I'm going to go ahead and pay it. But if you don't pay me and it's something monthly that you pay me for, your website might not work one day. And it'll be an easy fix. I'm going to have it redirecting to something else because there's a bill that you owe. Whatever it is, the point in this is that you want to plan these things out and have a clear understanding of where you want to go with it so you can articulate it back to your client and you can make sure that they're getting what they need and they have a great experience that they can deliver to their client that they're serving. So why does this process feel uncomfortable? And this part is important because adaptation is going to feel uncomfortable because there's no single right answer to this. You can't just follow steps. You can't just do what someone else is telling you to do. You have to make a decision. And this is going to be uncomfortable because you're not used to making decisions. Anytime a decision is being made, that's what's going to separate you from following someone else and actually learning what needs to be done. That moment when you're unsure and where you're trying to figure something out and you're making adjustments, where to refactor, where to rethink, am I wasting time? These are skills that's being built that's not talked about in a textbook and is usually not covered in the documentation and it's certainly not going to be in most tutorials. But if you're in a class, usually that professor is going to talk about, hey, this is the point where I'm not going to give you this much guidance. I'm not going to tell you what needs to be done next. I'm going to leave this up to you. And it's not because they're being mean or they don't want you to be successful or they just want you to fail. It's because programming in general is about decisions. If else statements, switch statements, for loops, while loops, all of these things are decisions. What makes the most sense based upon what it is that I'm trying to get done? And the more comfortable you can become with making decisions, the better you will be. You are developing a skill that is going to take you very far in the developer space and in life, and it's only going to make you better. So don't run away from it. It is going to feel uncomfortable. It is all a part of the process. And when you think about it, the real goal of adoption isn't necessarily to be perfect. The goal is to be confident that you can figure something out. Again, this thing is really about momentum, being confident, being sure of yourself, and delivering a good product. The more that you can do that, the better that you get at that, the more comfortable you get with doing those things, the better developer you're going to be. Once you start to trust that tutorials, once you start to trust yourself and you start to trust the fact that, hey, I know what I'm doing, I know how to get there, tutorials stop feeling like crutches and they feel more as a reference. I'm only watching this tutorial for one reason and one reason alone. You stop asking, can I do this? You stop second guessing yourself. And regardless to whatever it is that someone may come up with, you start to dissect it into smaller parts. I'll use the most recent thing that I'm working on for the friend of mine. The first thing we talked about was the user interface won't be a problem. Building out a calendar won't be a problem. Integrating a payment gateway won't be a problem. Having a database is a necessity with the full stack application, especially if you're going to have it out on the web. Now, you could have an internal server and set it up yourself and not leverage a service in the cloud or a service cluster, but usually we're going to leverage something that's already in place because we just don't have the equipment, the infrastructure, or the support in order to set up our own server. So, hey, are we looking for something real time? Is this going to require a real time experience? If it is, should we use Supabase? Should we use Convex? Should we use what is it? Firestore with Google? I forget the name of it. These are questions that you have to ask, and you want to kind of have a good understanding of the trade-offs with using each. It's a storage bucket. I generally like to just go with Prisma Postgres and then use the Vercel blob for storage. But hey, if you're sending over wave files and you have music that can be up to about 5 minutes in length and it needs to be dissected, Is Vercel the most cost efficient route to go? Should we look at a different route to go with this? These are some of the things that you want to kind of break down in the smaller steps, because you know how to upload a file to a cloud storage base. You know how to create a title, you know how to create the text, you know how to display it, you know how to implement a payment gateway. Now the big decision is, how do we care for the cost? How do we care for storing our data? What's the most efficient path to take with this? And as you start to think like this, and you stop saying, hey, I can't do this, you break things down into smaller parts, you start to kind of understand what's going to be aesthetics and what's going to be impactful to the actual project. This is a massive shift in your developer journey. And I promise you, you'll find yourself being successful with this, as long as you continue to have the desire to do it, as long as you have clients, and as long as you don't stop being a lifelong learner. So, look, if a tutorial ever got you stuck, it wasn't so much because you relied on them too much. It was because no one taught you how to adapt and actually learn yourself. So, next, I kind of want to talk a little bit about how to research things that you might not be familiar with. What's the appropriate way to kind of go about that? And some tactics that have worked for me in the past that I want to share with you that I think will be beneficial. So, we'll talk about that next. All right. So up to this point, we've talked about tutorials, documentation, and adaption. But eventually, every developer is going to hit that moment when there's no tutorial, there's no video guide, there's no step-by-step walkthrough of how to get something done that we want to get done. A client can ask for a feature that you've never built before. Your job is to deliver something that they want, but in the back of your mind, you've never done this, and it may not even exist on social media or for you to copy into the project. And that's usually when people think I'm not ready for this, or I need to learn more first, or I done got over my head, or I wonder if I could pay someone else to do this because I've bitten off more than I could chew. But this is where the real development process began. And this is where you really want to dig in and really kind of embrace this moment, because it's a big one for you. Because if you can find yourself to work through this and to figure this out and to deliver something that you and your client is proud of, this is going to give you the confidence and the momentum to pretty much do anything that you set out to do. But if you find yourself walking away and struggling and not completing and challenging yourself to complete the task at hand, not only are you going to let your client down and they're going to have to find someone else to implement what they're looking for, but you're going to start to feel as if you're not good enough and you won't continue your journey. And you're going to hit a ceiling or a roadblock of your capability because you didn't challenge yourself to do something that you probably could have done if you knew how to go about it. So I just want to talk about ways to research things that you might not be familiar with how to do, or there may not be a step-by-step walkthrough on how to add a particular feature to the stack that you're wanting to do, why it feels so scary, some tactics that'll work for me, and just some things that can overall help in this space as you're looking to embark on a challenge that you've never had before. So first I want to start with, why does this step in the process feel so scary, if you will? Research can be challenging because there's a level of uncertainty that comes along with it. And you, in the back of your mind, knowing that you have the quote unquote pressure to deliver. And if you don't deliver, that's where your anxiety and that pressure is only going to increase. And you're going to develop a bad reputation and won't have that walking billboard that you ultimately want. You see, with tutorials, they're going to tell you what to do, and research is going to force you to make decisions that you might not have been prepared to make. And this is part of the reason why this step feels uncomfortable and scary the most, because they're in a space that they've never been before. And now they're having to do something that they've never done. And a lot of people have a fear of challenges, especially with doing something they've never done before, when they have to deliver it to someone else. You see, right now, there's no clear guide. You're going to make assumptions and you're going to start to feel as if you lack the skill to actually do this. But in actuality, this is where you want to not panic and you want to breathe, and you really want to take a step by step approach in order to implement this, in order to get it into the project, get it working, test it with the client, and let the client decide on if this is something that they want and maybe want you to make tweaks and adjustments to. So, what does research in this step in the process actually mean? Research doesn't mean that you have to read every piece of documentation, you have to understand whatever it is that you have to implement from beginning to end. It just means that you're narrowing down the problem to specifically what it is that you're looking for. When I'm asked to build something that I'm not familiar with, I don't start with, how do I do this? I start by asking, what does this feature actually do? Someone said, hey, you know what? I would love the ability to not just click if a task is complete, but I'd love to be able to drag it over with my finger, because I don't feel like doing all that clicking. I just want to be able to drag and drop, right? So in my mind, what exactly are you looking for? You're looking for the ability to drag and drop. So first thing I'm going to say is, hey, where we're dragging and dropping, that's client side activity. Did I build this with a server approach, or does it already have client side activity on it? Is there a package that I can install to accomplish this? Or is this something I need to build from scratch? Which way that makes the most sense? But this is kind of how you want to start to think about it. Not so much of how do I build drag and drop, but hey, where do you want it? Where does it live? What's the impact? What does it look like? What all does it encompass? These are things that you want to start to ask yourself. What inputs does it take? What is the output procedure? What happens if this fail? What data is involved? Most features sound complex to begin with, when someone says drag and drop, but really when you think about it, it's something simple that you can implement with a package, or you can write it from scratch. It doesn't take a whole lot of work. But what if they ask for something like being able to see the weather? Hey, how do you go about adding in or tapping into that weather API for your client? Is it on the server? Is it on the client? Is there a free approach? Does it need to be by location, or does it just need to be the weather at this specific location because clients are coming to you? Or is this something that you just want to add that tells the local weather to each individual client? These are some of the things that as you become more mature and comfortable as a developer, you'll start to ask these questions versus panicking when someone asks you to do something that didn't fit the vision or the initial request made by the client. These are just things that you want to try to comfortably work through and not allow you to get overwhelmed with as you're doing your research. And the next thing you want to do is make sure that you are very intentional with your researching. So a process that I like to follow is, number one, I'm going to define the outcome. What does working actually mean? What does finish look like? You always want to start with what does completion look like so you can mark it off your board or your checklist of things to do. Number two, identify the unknowns. What don't I understand yet? What do I need to do some homework on? Building a beat sharing application for a friend of mine. Sure, I know how to upload files to a cloud database, but when you start working with large files, and you want to implement payments and you're going to have residual customers, what does that storage look like? What don't I know about storage just yet? Primarily the cost behind this that I need to prepare my client for. Step three, do research. Step three, I search intentionally. I always start with the documentations. Then I look at the examples laid out by the documentation. And then I might look at some comments and some discussion threads just to see what some other developers have said about the implementation of it. Are the documentations a little dated on its guidance on how to implement it? Is there a feature change with the framework that I'm using that causes this not to install as cleanly, and there's an additional feature I need to add in order to get it work? These are the things that you kind of want to prepare yourself for before you actually write code, because this is what's going to make that coding process that much easier. And the more prepared you are before you begin to write code, the easier it's going to be once you sit down writing code. So you're not wasting or spending so much time researching, but you research prior to coding, and now you're just jumping in coding based upon what it is that needs to get done, and you're not trying to go back and forth in between the two. And the next thing I like to do finally is I like to test my assumptions quickly, right? Go ahead and make some quick tests to test out what it is that I'm thinking. Make small incremental changes to the project so that I'm adding in the features that I need to. I'm testing it out. I'm making sure everything works. Write minimum code. Don't try to write everything so large in the one big file. That way, as you need to make changes and things are shifting, it's easier to shift when things are smaller versus you trying to update a large code base that you have a good understanding of it, but it's going to take you some time to get in here and really make these changes because you put everything in one big large file instead of breaking things down into smaller components. So that last step is I always like to test things out quickly, make my assumptions quickly, and then I begin to add on to that as I see things working and flowing the way that I design. So now, why does this skill matter more than actually understanding the framework itself? because a framework can change. They're going to get updated. They're going to be better ones that come out. They're going to be certain frameworks that are going to meet the client needs better than others. If I just need to render a static website for a client, I may use Flask versus a React or a Spring Boot project, because those require a little bit more than what a simple Python Flask project would require. But if I'm dealing with dynamic data, then I want something that's a little more powerful, a little more flexible as it relates to different features that can enhance the user experience. You know, Frameworks come and go, but being able to research and dig in and understand and learn new things on the fly, that skill is going to translate to every framework, every programming language, every type of programming umbrella that you work in, whether it be cybersecurity, web development, app development, game development. It really doesn't matter. You want to be able to research and have a good understanding of how to go about it and be comfortable with doing research on topics and implementing features that you aren't familiar with. The better you get at that, the better you're going to find yourself being as a developer, and the easier it's going to be to implement and add things. Think about it. If you can research effectively, you're never going to get blocked. You're never going to run into something that you can't do. You might be a little slower. You might get stuck. You might have to realize those triggers that tell you, hey, I need to step away. I've done enough today. My brain can't take anymore. You're going to have to be able to identify those things, but you're never going to find yourself in a position where you can't deliver something to the client, even if you have to be transparent and upfront that, hey, this is going to be a little new for me. And I've told a client this. So we're going to have to walk in this journey together. I may make a couple hiccups along the way, or I might not get everything perfect, but if you stick with me, I can deliver what you're looking for. And my client respected that. They appreciated that. And it made the process for me that much easier, because now I don't have the weight of the client over me, making sure that I deliver. I've already explained to them that, hey, this is going to be a quote unquote walk that's going to be a walk. And I need you to be patient with me as I implement these things. I'm still going to meet the deadline to deliver the core product that you're looking for, but these additional features, understand that there's downstream impact that I want to make sure I prepare us for as much as possible. And as long as you're being transparent in those scenarios, you're working with the individual client for a individual website, you're fine. Obviously, if you're working with a team, you have a senior or a mid-level developer that you kind of report into, they're going to probably give you the guidance that you need and the support to begin with. But ultimately, that skill and that ability to research is something that you definitely want to get comfortable with doing, because I promise you, if you can research and figure things out on your own, the sky is the limit. And then as you do that, you're going to start to experience a confidence shift in this process. And once that shift takes place, everything is going to change. You're going to stop asking, how do I do this? And you're going to start asking, how would I figure this out? That question is going to be more powerful than anything. How do I figure this out? When someone tells you something, you're going to grab your phone immediately, go to Google, and you're going to start to think about, boom, let me go ahead and do some research on this, or boom, let me go ahead and take a look into that. I was thinking of making my own budgeting application just to kind of help with my own personal finances, right? First thing I research, I know how to do everything that I would want for my budgeting application, but integrate the actual checking account or banking information into my website. Initially, I thought about using Python because I know that there are different packages that I can use, that I can write, that I can automate this process, right? Where I could say, hey, go ahead and click on this link at this. When I hit this button, I want you to go to this URL. I want you to type in this password. I want you to hit the enter button. And then I want you to pull the information from this account and transfer it back to this user interface. But upon research, there's actually a way that I can go about it much easier, and I can implement it into any framework because something else exists. This was me doing research. But had I not done the research, I would have taken the longer approach, done more coding than what was needed, and really convoluted the project with all of these different frameworks and programming languages when I can just use one programming language and use a trusted source to help me with this that'll give me the right exposure to an API so I can present the data within my website slash app that I'm looking for. Again, I had the confidence to do the research. Well, number one, I had the wherewithal to do the research. And then number two, as I became comfortable and was comfortable with doing research, that only increased my confidence. And then now, as the confidence started to increase, you start to ask yourself the right questions of how do I go about figuring this thing out? You know, that fear turns into curiosity, and that curiosity is the confusion goes away and confusion turns into let me develop a plan. Once you get here, now you're on the path to success. And I promise you, if you just break things down into small incremental steps, know how to do your research and know what you're researching for, really you have a powerful skill at your fingertips, and you could do anything you set out to do with the ability to code. You just have to know how to go about it and have the confidence and the skill set to know what you're looking for and when you want to look for it. So if you've ever felt you couldn't move forward without a tutorial, I just want you to know something. That's not a weakness, that's a missing skill. And it's not talked about in textbooks, documentation, and very rarely talked about in the class. But once you understand how to research with the purpose and you stop being so dependent upon tutorials, you'll find yourself moving away from tutorials in general, and you'll develop the skill to build and plan things out on your own. And then once you get to that space, not only will you become a better developer, but I also want you to give back to someone else and help someone else out, because that's ultimately what this is all about. It's not just about how good you could become individually, but it's more about you giving back to someone else, because two things get accomplished right then. Number one, you're helping someone else, which is always a good and a great thing to do. And number two, selfishly, you're teaching someone else, which is only going to sharpen your skills as a developer. All right, so the last thing I want to speak with you about today is something that almost every developer experience, but very few talk about. All right, so today I want to talk about something that almost every developer experiences, but very few people like to talk about. And it's feeling slow, feeling confused, feeling like you should be further along than where you are at the moment. Because at some point in learning the code, everyone is going to ask themselves the same question. Why does this feel so hard? Am I really cut out to do this? Is this meant for me? Should this be easier by now? And if you've ever felt that way, I want you to hear me clearly. That feeling doesn't mean that you're failing. It usually means that you're closer to getting better than what you actually think. So, first, let's start with understanding why learning feels so hard or so challenging to begin with. You see, learning code can be really frustrating, right? It's a pattern that you have to pick up on, but the first thing you're usually taught is the syntax. You know, in the beginning, everyone's excited. You're following tutorials, you're following things as someone is telling you what to do. You're seeing progress, you're getting that immediate gratification, you're building things step by step, right? And then all of a sudden, everything is going to start to slow down, things are going to shift. You're going to understand less. You're going to question more. You're going to notice gaps everywhere. People are going to start telling you things that your code isn't efficient. This is going to run slow. And, you know, all of these things may be true, but at the stage you're at right now, that's not what you need to hear. What you need to hear is positive reinforcement, transparency, honesty, but positive reinforcement to keep you motivated and encouraged to keep going. And usually when people start to give all of this constructive criticism that's relevant but not relevant to the stage that you're at, that's usually when you start to assume something is wrong. But what actually happened is your awareness is starting to increase, and you're starting to pay attention to things outside of just what you should be focused on. You didn't necessarily get worse at coding. You're not horrible at doing this. You do have the skill and the wherewithal to do it. You're just asked to be more accurate. You're no longer just following instructions, but you're starting to be introduced to some complexity. And I do want you to understand that that confusion, that feeling is really a sign of growth. And that's not what we're always told in the beginning. Being confused and being overwhelmed isn't necessarily a sign to stop coding. It may be a sign to take a break. It may be a sign to step away. It may be a sign to do something else that you do for leisure, but it's not a reason to stop and not code anymore. It's a signal that your brain is starting to reorganize things and you've been introduced to something else, right? Early learning is fast because you don't know what you don't know. Anything, if I tell you that a variable is this, you just learn something new because you just started, right? And you're going to progress beyond that. And as you begin to progress beyond that, that learning is going to start to feel slow. All of the edge cases, all of the trade-offs, all of the uncertainty, these are things that just kind of come up in the learning journey and they contribute to confusion. But as you're being more and more exposed to that, understand that that level of confusion really is the sign that you're growing and you should keep going. But the problem is that this is the space and the time that most people lack confidence. They start to feel as if they can't do this. They start to feel behind, and ultimately they identify themselves as failing with coding and eventually just quitting. And that's not what you should be doing at this point. When you usually do this, you start to compare yourself to others. Someone told me that I'm writing too much code, or my code isn't modular, or I have too much redundancy. Now I begin to compare myself to someone else. And comparing yourself to someone else is only going to amplify that feeling of confusion. If you watch someone else develop something online, they sound confident, they move fast, they type fast, they don't show any hesitation, no uncertainty. They just seem like the most confident person in the world, right? And you start to think that, hey, everyone else is great at this but me. But what you're actually doing is you're comparing yourself to someone else, and you're beginning to ignite that uncertainty, inside of you, and you're confusing their edited presentation with what reality is. That comparison is not fair and it's not useful, and you've got to stop comparing yourself to other people because it's only going to be a detractor to your confidence. And that is only going to set you back as a developer. Progress in software development is not linear, it's layered. You want to have compound interest, one on top of the other, as it relates to progressing with development. It's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be, hey, I learned about variables. I learned about Booleans. I learned about while loops. I learned about arrays. I learned about objects. I learned about data structures and algorithms. You won't come in learning data structures and algorithms. You're going to start with variables first. But as you begin to learn more, you work your way up to that. That's why I say that it's not linear, it's layered. And the more you revisit ideas and get a deeper understanding with each of those, the more confident you're going to be. That level of confusion starts to wear away. And you begin to get more confident that, hey, you know what? Great job to that developer. He's strong. He does a great job. But I bring some skills to the table too. That confidence is what you want to always remember and keep. And the deeper that you have an understanding of those things, you start to recognize your own skill set and you speak about yourself confidently, not cocky, not arrogant, but confidently. So, what exactly keeps people going? The developers who make it aren't the ones who feel confident all the time. They're not the ones that wake up out of bed feeling great every day. They're the ones that know how to keep going, even if they feel unsure about something. Because you're going to have times where you're not as confident. You're going to have times where you're not unsure. You just have to recognize that moment, what you should do to care for your mental, and how you should keep going. If a senior developer stop chasing the feeling of I get it and just start trusting the process of figuring things out, that's where you want to be. You're not going to always get it. You're not going to always immediately understand. You just want to be in a space where you know how to figure things out. You know how to break things down. You know how to speak a language that works for you. You know how to identify when is a time for learning, when is a time for practicing, when is a time for active learning, when is a time for active practicing. You just got to identify those stages with yourself and know when you need to lean into something and when you need to take a step back from something. Remember, you want to rely on momentum. Don't rely on constant motivation because that's not going to always be there. Take those small wins, show up every day, hold yourself accountable to doing the things that you set out to do. That's going to be the difference with what actually keeps you going versus what can deter you on this journey. So let's talk about how to reframe your mindset so that you can kind of change this and you can find yourself in a better space going forward. You know, that feeling that's, how do I want to say this? Feeling slow doesn't mean that you're bad at coding. It just means that you're doing work that requires you to think. There's nothing wrong with you not finishing first as it relates to certain things with coding. I mean, unless you're in a race and you've been doing this for a while. But for those that are just getting started, there's nothing wrong with being a little slower with certain things. It just means that you're thinking, you're showing up, you're actually working. And if you're making some progress, let's just say you want to connect to a payment gateway. Maybe the first thing you did was understand how to install the Stripe package. And then the next day you said, hey, where do I want to implement this app? The next day you said, hey, where do I want to click on this app? The next day you say, hey, now do I have the webhooks and all of the Stripe package installed? How do I want this to write back to the user? Do it on a day by day basis if that's what's needed. Break it down into smaller parts. Don't try to tackle the entire task at once. That will feel overwhelming. But I promise if you take it step by step, take the small wins, take the small approach, you'll find those wins start to stack up on each other. You'll eventually have the payment gateway installed that you were looking for. And more importantly, you'll have the confidence and momentum to now take it to the next step of saying, hey, how do I implement an automated shipping process? How do I implement a successful email to the client once the payment has successfully gone through with the confirmation number? Whatever the feature may be, have the end goal in mind, but break it down into smaller steps that work for you. That's going to keep you showing up. That's going to keep you confident. And that's more importantly going to get you to the finish line. Don't always rely on others and don't rely on speed and I'm not moving as fast as someone else to be the end all be all as it relates to how you should be coding and how you should be getting things done. So if you're feeling tired or you're feeling confused or you're discouraged right now, just hear me clearly. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just learning the way you should learn. And generally, that does take time. Not everyone is going to be a programmer to the point that they can get a job in 6 months. Some people, it's going to take a little longer than that. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. If you keep showing up, if you keep thinking, you keep trusting the process, I promise you at some point this will click. It won't happen all at once. It's not going to be dramatic. It's going to silently click, and you're just going to realize that your confidence has really gotten to a different space. And that one day you're going to look back and just realize that, hey, I've crossed the line of being not confident to being feeling like I can build anything that I want. All I need is just the time and someone that has a perspective on what it is that they're looking for, because that is going to be the real progress that you're looking for. Not being the first one to finish, not being the first one to get the code done. You want to build incremental wins day by day, week by week, month by month, feature by feature, and then you'll find yourself becoming the developer that you ultimately want it to be.